I said move. This cabin is not for you. The words landed like a door slamming shut on everything decent. And then the hand moved. The slap rang out across the business class cabin of charter flight SK-114 with a sound that did not belong in that space. Too sharp, too final, too loud for the amber-lit interior with its wide leather seats and its cedar smell and its carefully maintained illusion of luxury and order. It cut through the pressurized air of the cabin the way a crack cuts through ice, sudden, total, and impossible to pretend away. For one suspended moment, nobody breathed. The flight attendant stood with her hand still raised, chin lifted, eyes carrying the cold, settled certainty of someone who has never once imagined being wrong. Her name badge caught the light. Renee. 9 years with Skybridge Airways. 9 years of polished smiles and calibrated authority, and a deep, unexamined belief that she understood exactly how the world was arranged, and exactly where everyone in it belonged. She had looked at the woman in front of her and decided. In under 3 seconds. The way certain people always decide. Fast and total and without a single doubt. The woman she had struck stood perfectly still. No gasp, no tears, no hand flying to her cheek, no trembling lip, no sound at all. Just a stillness that filled the cabin more completely than any outburst could have. A stillness that was not shock and was not submission, and was not the blankness of someone who did not understand what had just happened. She understood completely. She reached up slowly with 2 fingers and straightened her wire-rimmed glasses on her face. Then she lowered her hand to her side, and she looked at Renee Calloway with an expression that was not anger. Anger was too simple for what lived behind those eyes. It was something older and quieter and infinitely more patient. It was the expression of a woman who had spent 44 years walking into rooms that tried to make her smaller and had learned long ago that rage is a gift you give to people who do not deserve it. That the most powerful thing you can do with a room full of people who have underestimated you is nothing. Just yet. The cabin held its breath around her. In seat 2C Douglas Pratt, 52 years old, regional VP, 3 drinks measured by the amber depth of his glass, had made a sound when the slap landed. Not quite a laugh, not quite a gasp. Something in between low and reflexive, the sound of a man who had been startled and was not sure yet whether to be troubled by that. He looked at his drink now. He did not look at the woman standing in the aisle. In row 3A and 3B, an older couple in matching resort-weight linen. The Harrises, 60-something, the kind of people who have spent decades perfecting the art of not getting involved, had gone completely rigid. They were staring at the bulkhead in front of them with the focused intensity of people determined to have seen nothing. In seat 4B, a man named Marcus Holloway had not moved. He was 34 years old, a travel journalist, someone who noticed things for a living. He had been noticing things since this woman walked up the stairs onto this aircraft. His jaw was set now. His eyes had not left the woman's face since the sound of the slap reached him. He was memorizing something. He would not forget. In the galley doorway, a younger flight attendant, Carmen Vega, 26, 14 months, with Skybridge, stood with both hands gripping the frame. Her face had gone pale in a way she could not control. Something about this moment was pressing against the inside of her chest with an urgency she could not yet name. Renee lowered her hand. She smoothed the front of her uniform jacket with the practiced composure of someone returning from a momentary detour. She looked out at the cabin with a professional expression that suggested the situation had been resolved rather than created. She said in a voice that had returned to its normal register, "We will be departing shortly. Please ensure your seatbelts are fastened." The woman in the aisle looked at her. She said so quietly that only Renee and the nearest seats could hear, "You just made the most expensive mistake of your career." Then quieter, "I want you to remember that I said it calmly." Renee told her she could make herself comfortable in the rear of the cabin or be removed. She said it like nothing happened. Marcus Holloway said from 4B clearly, and for the record, everyone in this cabin just witnessed that. Douglas said nothing this time. He looked at his drink. Nadine walked to the rear of the cabin. She sat. She folded her hands in her lap. She looked out the window at the rain coming down on the tarmac in silver sheets against the hangar lights. She did not look at Renee Calloway again. She did not need to. The accounting had already begun. Let's stop here for just a moment, because I need you to understand something before we go any further. The woman sitting in the back of that jet, the one in the burgundy hoodie, the one with the worn canvas tote and the wire-rimmed glasses, and the stillness that filled the cabin like a held breath. She is not a lawyer who is going to file a complaint. She is not a journalist who is going to write an exposé. She is not going to call anyone on her phone in the next 3 minutes and describe what just happened in an angry voice. She is not going to cry. She is not, in fact, going to do anything that Renee Calloway would recognize as a threat. And that is precisely the point. In 11 hours and 43 minutes, Skybridge Airways will begin losing money. Not gradually, not over the course of a difficult week or a painful quarter, in a single business morning. Before the market closes its first hour of trading, this airline will have shed tens of millions of dollars in value, not because of a crash, not because of a scandal discovered by an investigator, not because of anything that required a single raised voice or a single dramatic confrontation, because of a phone call made quietly from the back seat of a car in the rain. Because of 4 words spoken to an assistant who picked up on the first ring. Because of $280 million in investment that was, as of 11 hours and 43 minutes from now, no longer coming. Here is what nobody in that cabin knows tonight. Not Renee Calloway, not Douglas Pratt, not the Harrises in their matching linen, not even Tom Girardi in the cockpit running his pre-departure checks. The woman in seat 7A, the one they have spent the last 20 minutes treating as though she does not belong on this aircraft, has been in quiet negotiations with Skybridge's board of directors for 7 months. The signing was scheduled for 9 o'clock tomorrow morning, a rescue investment that would have kept this airline solvent through the restructuring it desperately needed. The contracts had been reviewed 4 times by counsel on both sides. Everything was ready. And then Renee Calloway looked at a woman in a burgundy hoodie and decided in under 3 seconds who she was and what she was worth. That is the story of what happens when an institution mistakes surface for substance. When the machinery of a company, the smiles and the uniforms and the policies and the people hired to enforce them, operates on assumptions so deeply embedded they have never once required examination. And when the person those assumptions are applied to turns out to be the one holding the key to that institution's survival. This is not a story about one bad employee. It is a story about what it costs, really costs in dollars and consequences and futures, when an organization trains its people to see some passengers and look through others. The woman in seat 7A has spent her entire life in rooms that looked through her. She is very good at math. But first, let's go back. Let's go back to how she ended up on this jet tonight and who exactly she is and why the choice. Renee Calloway made at the top of those aircraft stairs was not just a moral failure, but the most financially consequential mistake in Skybridge Airways history. Let's start from the beginning. Nadine Okafor is 44 years old. She is wearing a burgundy hoodie that she bought 3 years ago because it is comfortable on overnight flights, and she does not own a more impressive version for the same purpose. The wire-rimmed glasses are 4 years old. She has been meaning to replace them and has not because she sees fine and there is always something more pressing to do with that particular hour. The canvas tote bag she carries is worn soft at the handles from use. It contains a tablet, a charger, a change of clothes, and a folder of documents she reviewed on the commercial flight that was canceled this evening by a storm rolling in off the coast. Her posture is the most expensive thing about her. Not in any performative way. She is not standing at attention or holding herself to be seen. It is something else, something that lives in the quality of how she occupies space. A quality that has nothing to do with what she is wearing and everything to do with who she has spent 20 years becoming. People who pay attention notice it immediately. People who have already decided she does not matter miss it entirely. She travels this way by design. She learned long ago that the truest picture of any company is not in its annual report and not in its leadership presentations and not in the careful choreography of a formal site visit. It is in the unremarkable moments, the ones that happen when no one of apparent consequence is watching. An announced arrival tells you what a company wants you to see. An unannounced arrival tells you everything else. She has learned more from unannounced arrivals than from any boardroom she has ever sat in. Tonight she booked this charter seat 2 hours ago, standing in the middle of Harrington International's departures hall, while the storm board flipped her commercial flight from delayed to canceled. She has used Skybridge before on 3 prior occasions in exactly this way, alone, unannounced, paying full fare from her own card under her own name. She has been watching this company for 14 months. Tonight was not planned as an evaluation, but she is always watching. She crossed the rain-slicked tarmac of the private terminal. Alone, her hood pulled flat against the wind, and she climbed the short staircase into the aircraft. The jet is a Gulfstream in Skybridge's ivory and blue livery. Charter flight SK-114. The interior is the kind of design intended to communicate effortless sophistication. Wide leather seats and a pale cream recessed amber lighting the faint cedar smell of quality upholstery recently cleaned. Tonight there are 4 passengers in a cabin that seats 10. It is the kind of aircraft that makes certain people feel important. It did not have that effect on Nadine. She noted the cabin. She noted the other passengers. She noted the exits. In seat 4B, Marcus Holloway had already settled with his book open across his knee. He is 34, black, broad-shouldered in a way that makes the seat seem slightly small with a reporter's stillness, the particular quality of a person who has trained himself to be unobtrusive enough that people forget he is observing them. He writes primarily about travel and hospitality for a national magazine. He has been on 47 Skybridge flights. He notices things for a living, and he had already noticed, without entirely knowing why, that the woman who had just come up the stairs carried herself like someone who was not surprised by anything. In seats 3A and 3B, the Harrises. Gerald and Patricia, both in their mid-60s resort clothes that suggested they were beginning or ending a vacation and had decided not to let weather interfere. They were already deeply involved in their own conversation and had not looked up when Nadine boarded. In seat 2C, Douglas Pratt. Douglas Pratt is 52 years old, with the wide, settled face of a man who has been comfortable his entire adult life and has confused comfort with merit. He is a regional VP at a commercial insurance firm, a title that gives him authority over 17 people, and the conviction unearned that this represents some fundamental ordering of the universe. He is wearing a blazer that cost real money over a shirt that is partially untucked. The glass in his right hand contains something amber and is sweating slightly at the base. This is not his first drink of the evening. He had looked at Nadine when she boarded with the specific flicker of a man who has categorized something before it speaks. Not hostile, not quite, but immediate and total and based on nothing she had done or said. He had looked back at his drink. Renee Calloway met Nadine at the top of the stairs. She is 41. She has been a flight attendant with Skybridge Airways for 9 years, long enough to carry that tenure like a credential, long enough to have developed without ever articulating it, a complete and unexamined theory of who belongs in this cabin and who does not. She is blonde, precise, polished in the particular way of someone who has practiced pleasantness so long it has replaced something less comfortable. Her eyes moved over Nadine in a single practiced sweep. Hoodie, canvas bag, glasses, no jewelry of any significance, no designer label anywhere visible, no assistant, no security, no signal, none that Renee recognized, of the kind of person who books business class on a private charter. Something in Renee's expression adjusted, not dramatically, like a thermostat dropping 1 degree. The professional warmth that she had offered the Harrises when they boarded the easy welcome she had extended to Douglas Pratt and his glass of whiskey. That warmth did not make the journey to the top of the stairs when Nadine arrived. She did not smile. She asked for the booking confirmation in a voice that was polite, the way a form letter is polite, technically correct, entirely without warmth. In the galley, barely visible, Carmen Vega was restocking the bar cart. She is 26. Latina with quick dark eyes and the particular alertness of someone who is new enough to this job to still be paying attention to everything. 14 months with Skybridge. She had been with the company long enough to know how Renee ran a cabin, and not quite long enough to have made her peace with all of it. She glanced up when Nadine boarded. Something about the woman's face pressed at the edge of her memory with the soft insistence of a word she could not quite place. She had seen that face before. Not in person. Somewhere on a screen. Attached to something. A headline, maybe. A photograph. She could not place it, and the pre-departure checklist was waiting, and Renee had a specific look she gave you when you were behind on prep. Carmen looked back at the bar cart. She would remember later that she almost had it right there at the top of the stairs before the boarding was even complete. She would think about that for a long time. Nadine approached the forward section of the cabin and stopped at the end of the armrest for seat 2A. She set her canvas tote on the seat and turned to Renee, who was standing behind the service counter with her hands folded and her expression already arranged. "I have a booking," Nadine said. "Seat 2A, full fare business class." She held out her phone with the confirmation visible on the screen. Renee took it. She took it the way someone handles something they expect to find wrong, with 2 fingers tilted slightly away as though proximity were the issue. She looked at the screen. The booking was there, clear and unambiguous, Okafor N, seat 2A. Business class confirmed. Full fare paid. Booking reference. Timestamp. Everything in order. Renee stared at it for 15 seconds longer than the information required. The cabin was quiet enough that the sound of rain against the fuselage was audible. Marcus Holloway in 4B had not turned a page. From seat 2C, Douglas Pratt looked over with the easy, sprawling attention of a man who believes every moment in his vicinity belongs to him. "You sure you're in the right aircraft, sweetheart?" His voice was not quite loud enough to be called shouting and far too loud to be called private. He had the cadence of someone who has made jokes like this his whole life and has never once been asked to stop. "Cargo entrance is around the other side, I think." He grinned at the middle distance. No one responded. He did not seem to need them to. Renee handed Nadine's phone back. She did not make eye contact when she did it. "I'll need to verify this further," she said. "Please wait here while I make a call." "The confirmation is there," Nadine said. "Full fare, seat 2A. I understand that. I'll still need to verify." Renee's tone was the verbal equivalent of a door held open just enough to be technically ajar. "It will only take a moment." She walked to the forward galley and disappeared behind the partition. 3 minutes passed. Nadine stood beside seat 2A and waited. She did not sit down uninvited. She did not look around the cabin for support. She stood with her hands at her sides and her weight evenly distributed, and she waited with the particular patience of someone who has done this before, who has stood in lobbies and offices and corridors and been made to wait, while someone in a uniform or behind a desk decided whether she was worth their time, and who has learned that patience in these moments is not weakness, it is intelligence. Douglas Pratt made a comment about overhead bin space and people who apparently did not know what carry-on restrictions were. He said it to no one in particular. It landed in the cabin like a stone dropped into still water, the ripples touching everything. The Harrises continued to examine their mineral water. Marcus Holloway turned a page. He had not read a word of it. Renee returned. She had the expression of someone who had gone looking for a problem and was irritated not to have found one. "The booking appears to be in order," she said. The word "appears" carried a great deal of weight in that sentence. It implied that the booking's orderliness was conditional, a provisional assessment rather than a fact, something that might yet be reconsidered. However, Renee gestured toward the rear of the cabin. "Due to weight distribution requirements this evening, we'll need you seated further toward the back. We have a perfectly comfortable seat in row 7. Nadine looked at her. "My booking is for seat 2A, she said. Quiet. Even. The tone of someone stating a coordinate, not making an argument. "I'd like to sit there, please." Something shifted in Renee's jaw. Barely visible. A tightening at the hinge, a degree of pressure that had not been there before. She stepped one small increment closer to Nadine and lowered her voice to the register that is designed to be heard only by its recipient, while appearing to the cabin as a perfectly normal exchange. "I would strongly suggest," she said, "that you not make this into something it does not have to be." Nadine looked at her without blinking. She took one step forward. Not large, not aggressive, simply present, closing the distance enough to make clear that she would not be talked backward. "My seat," she said, "is 2A. The silence that followed lasted perhaps 4 seconds. Then Renee straightened. She pulled back slightly. Something had moved behind her eyes. Not retreat, not yet, but a recalculation. She turned and walked back toward the forward galley without another word, and a moment later the cockpit door opened and Tom Girardi stepped through. Tom Girardi is 38 First Officer on SK-114 with a blunt square face and the particular manner of a man who has been told things by Renee Calloway before and has found it easier to act on them than to question them. He walked the aisle with the slightly too deliberate pace of someone who has been given a purpose and is committed to it. He stopped in front of Nadine. "Ma'am," he said, "I'm going to need to ask you to confirm your identity and provide a secondary form of identification." Nadine looked at him. "No other passenger was asked for secondary identification," she said. "This is standard procedure for certain booking categories," Tom said. It was the kind of sentence that sounded like a policy, but was not one. It was a policy-shaped sentence built for this specific moment. Nadine reached into her tote and produced her driver's license. She held it out. Tom took it, looked at it for longer than the image required, turned it over, turned it back, and handed it to her. "There may be a slight delay," he said. "The booking system has flagged your entry as unverified. We'll need to hold departure while this is resolved. From 2C Douglas Pratt, Audible. Take your time. Some of us were perfectly happy until about 10 minutes ago." He raised his glass in no particular direction. Marcus Holloway set his book face down on his knee. He looked at Tom Girardi with the patient recording attention of someone filing everything. He did not speak yet. He was deciding. In the galley entrance, Carmen Vega watched all of this with her hands still on the bar cart. The pressing at the edge of her memory had gotten louder. She had seen this woman's face. She was almost certain. Tom returned to the cockpit. Renee reappeared. She walked to Nadine and told her with the calm precision of someone executing a prepared statement that she would need to surrender her phone with the booking confirmation for authentication purposes. The charter desk would generate a printed, verified copy and return it before departure. Nadine looked at her for a moment. She understood exactly what was happening. They were building a paper record. A record that could be used to describe her as non-cooperative, as a booking irregularity, as something other than what she was. A paying passenger standing beside the seat she had paid for on a flight she was entitled to take. She understood this. She handed over her phone, calmly, without expression. She watched Renee take it and walk away, and she stood beside seat 2A in the amber-lit cabin of a jet she could buy 3 times without checking the balance, and she waited. The rain continued outside against the fuselage. The departure time came and went. Douglas Pratt finished his drink and signaled for another without looking up. The Harrises studied the laminated safety card with the dedicated focus of people who have decided the safest thing to look at is the thing directly in front of them. In seat 4B, Marcus Holloway looked at the woman standing by 2A and made a decision. He would not look away from this. Whatever happened next, he would see all of it. Nadine stood and waited, and she thought she had given them the rope. Now she would watch what they chose to do with it. Renee did not come back with the phone. What she did instead was disappear into the forward section for 90 seconds, and when the cockpit door opened again, it was Tom Girardi who came through it, and he had the phone in his hand and a clipboard in the other, and an expression of bureaucratic neutrality that was doing a great deal of work to conceal whatever Renee had told him in those 90 seconds. He stopped in front of Nadine. "I've reviewed the booking with the charter desk," he said. He spoke the way certain official-sounding people speak, with the cadence of policy, the rhythm of a procedure being followed, the comforting shape of due process applied to something that was not due process at all. "There are some inconsistencies in the system that we'll need to address before we can clear you for boarding." "What inconsistencies?" Nadine said. It was not a question. It was a request for specific information delivered in the flat tone of someone who would not accept vagueness as a substitute for an answer. Tom looked at his clipboard. "The booking reference does not match our standard third-party charter protocol. It may have been entered incorrectly at the point of sale." "I booked directly through the Skybridge charter portal," Nadine said. 2 hours ago. The confirmation is on the phone you are holding. I understand that." Tom's voice had not changed. It was a very consistent voice, consistent in the way that things trained to resist pressure are consistent. We'll still need to run a secondary verification through our system. While that's in process, I'm going to ask you to take a seat in the rear of the cabin. My seat is 2A. Temporarily, just while we sort this out. From seat 2C, Douglas Pratt did not look up from his drink, but he offered the cabin. There's a problem up here. I'm trying to relax. Renee appeared from the galley. She moved past Tom with the practiced efficiency of someone who knows exactly where they are going, and she set Nadine's phone face down on the edge of the service counter, not returning it, not securing it, just setting it aside in a way that communicated clearly that it was no longer in Nadine's possession, and there was nothing she intended to do about that right now. Nadine looked at the phone on the counter. She said, "That's my property. It will be returned once the verification is complete," Renee said. "Please take your seat in the rear." Nadine did not move. She looked at Renee. She looked at Tom. She looked at Douglas Pratt in 2C, who was watching this with the particular attention of a man who has decided he is entertained. She looked at the Harrises in 3A and 3B, who were studying the window with such intensity you would have thought the tarmac outside contained something remarkable. She looked at Marcus Holloway in 4B, who had closed his book entirely and was looking back at her with an expression that was not passive. It was the expression of a witness making a decision. "I'll note," Marcus said from seat 4B, clearly deliberately with the specific vocal projection of someone who wants what he is saying to be heard, "that no other passenger's booking was questioned, and no other passenger's personal property was retained by crew." Renee turned to him. Her professional expression held. "Sir, I'll ask you to allow me to manage the cabin." "I'm not interfering with anything," Marcus said. "I'm making an observation." "Your observation is noted," Tom said in the voice that means the opposite. From the galley entrance, Carmen Vega watched. The feeling that had been pressing at the edge of her memory since boarding had gotten louder, less a vague impression now and more a specific urgency, like a word rising toward the surface of water. She had seen this woman's face. She had. On a screen in print attached to something important. She tried to pull it forward and it would not come, and Renee was watching the galley from the corner of her eye, and the departure checklist was open on the counter, and Carmen turned back to it with her hands not quite steady. Tom Girardi made a show of writing something on his clipboard. He clicked his pen twice. He looked at the clipboard as though it contained information rather than the performance of information. "I'm going to note this interaction for the record," he said. "Please do," Nadine said. "Note everything, all of it. The time, the statements, the names, the sequence." Tom looked at her over the top of the clipboard. "Is there something specific you'd like me to include?" he asked. "Everything you've said since you came through that cockpit door," Nadine said. "Word for word if possible. I'll be making the same note." Something moved across Tom's face. Not guilt. He had not arrived at guilt yet. More like the first faint signal of a calculation beginning that he had not anticipated needing to run. He looked at Renee. She gave him the briefest, most composed nod. He looked back at Nadine. "Please take a seat in the rear of the cabin," he said again. "We'll have this resolved before departure." Nadine looked at her phone on the counter for a long moment. She looked at Renee. She looked at Tom. She walked to the rear of the cabin. She sat in seat 7A. She put her canvas tote on the seat beside her. She looked out the window at the rain on the tarmac and the hangar lights and the private terminal building where other passengers were presumably having a different kind of evening. She breathed slowly. She thought about the clipboard. She thought about the word inconsistencies and the phrase third-party charter protocol, and the way the phone had been set face down on the counter with the particular deliberateness of something being removed from the situation rather than stored, the way you put something aside when you want it to disappear without technically stealing it. She thought about the way Tom had said note this interaction as though the noting were neutral, as though the clipboard were a mirror rather than a tool being pointed in a specific direction. She was watching an institution operate, not one bad actor making a personal choice. An institution with its layers of deference and its habits of compliance and its unspoken agreements about who requires scrutiny and who does not. Renee had started it. Tom had continued it. The clipboard had formalized it. The phone on the counter had made it material. She had seen this before. Not this specifically. Not this cabin, not these people, not this airline. But this shape. This familiar, practiced, invisible shape of exclusion operating through the machinery of procedure. She had seen it in boardrooms and lobbies and interview rooms and aircraft cabins and restaurant entrances and hotel desks. She had seen it her whole life. The difference was that tonight she knew exactly what it was worth. In seat 4B, Marcus Holloway had removed a small notebook from his breast pocket. He held it closed in his hand. He had not opened it yet. He was deciding whether what he was watching was what he thought it was, or whether he was still on the wrong side of certainty. He looked at the woman in 7A. She was sitting with her hands folded and her gaze on the window and her back straight and her expression entirely unreadable, and Marcus Holloway, who had been writing about how people moved through the world for 12 years, decided that he was not on the wrong side of anything. He opened the notebook. In the front of the cabin, Douglas Pratt had accepted a third drink from Renee with a particular kind of ease, the ease of a man who has never had to wonder whether his comfort would be served, and had said something about how nice it was when flights ran without drama. He had said this while looking at the service counter where Nadine's phone sat face down. Renee had smiled at him. A real smile, not the professional calibrated version. Something warmer than that. She walked back toward the galley without looking at the rear of the cabin. And Nadine Okafor, in seat 7A, 32,000 feet below the altitude she would soon be traveling at, in a jet belonging to a company she was scheduled to invest $280 million in at 9 o'clock the following morning, sat with her hands folded and thought. She had given them the rope. She had given them the rope and the time and the audience, and they were taking every inch of it. Good. Renee came back with the phone 18 minutes later. 18 minutes during which departure was held without explanation, during which Douglas Pratt finished his third drink and started his fourth, during which the Harrises had the careful and wordless communication of a couple deciding how much discomfort they were willing to notice, and during which Marcus Holloway had written 6 pages in his notebook in the neat, tight handwriting of someone who has learned to get everything down before the details soften. During which Carmen Vega in the galley had opened and closed the Skybridge internal portal on the cabin tablet 4 times without completing the search. She kept starting and abandoning every time she heard Renee move in the forward section. Renee walked the length of the cabin to where Nadine sat in 7A. She was carrying the phone, and she had the particular bearing of someone who has gone off to make a call and has returned with a decision. She stopped at Nadine's row. She did not hand the phone back immediately. She held it at her side, and she looked at Nadine, and she said loudly enough that the words carried forward through the cabin without her appearing to raise her voice. "I've spoken with the charter desk. They've reviewed your booking, and I'm afraid they cannot verify it to the standard required for business class access on this service." Nadine looked at her. "The booking is confirmed," Nadine said. "Paid in full. I have the confirmation reference. It is on that phone. I understand you believe that," Renee said. "However, the charter desk has flagged the entry as irregular. As a result, I'm going to need to ask you to wait at the terminal while we rebook you on a later service." She offered the phone back now with 2 fingers, a small and precise humiliation wrapped in the language of helpfulness. "I'm sorry for the inconvenience." "I am not going to the terminal," Nadine said. Her voice had not changed. It was the same even, quiet, unhurried register it had been since she walked up the stairs. If anything, it had gotten quieter the way certain temperatures drop before something breaks. "I have a confirmed booking," she said. "I have paid for this flight. I intend to take this flight." From seat 2C, Douglas Pratt made a sound. Not quite a word. A sound of exaggerated patience, the theatrical exhalation of a man who has appointed himself the spokesperson for everyone's inconvenience. "There you go," he said pleasantly to the cabin in general. "Mystery solved." He raised his glass in Renee's direction like she had done something worth acknowledging. Renee did not look at him, but she did not correct him either. She turned back to Nadine. Something had shifted in her bearing. The veneer of professional neutrality had thinned, not disappeared, but worn enough that what lived beneath it was becoming visible. It was not exactly hostility. It was older than hostility. It was the certainty of a person who has never genuinely considered the possibility that their judgment of another person could be wrong. She stepped closer to Nadine's row. She said, "If you refuse to comply with crew instructions, I will need to document this as a disruptive passenger incident that has consequences for future travel." "Document it," Nadine said. "Excuse me, document everything," Nadine said. "Everything you've done since I reached the top of those stairs. The booking verification you held for 18 minutes. The way my phone was retained without my consent. This conversation. All of it. Document it completely." A beat of silence. From seat 4B, Marcus Holloway spoke. He had the particular calm of someone who has decided the moment for careful neutrality has passed. "She has not been disruptive," he said. "She has been standing at her booked seat and providing her documentation. The disruption, if anyone is interested in precision, has been elsewhere." Renee turned to him. Her professional expression was a masterpiece of restraint. It held completely, but the effort was now visible. "Sir," she said, "I need to ask you to allow me to manage my cabin." "You keep saying that," Marcus said. "I keep watching how you manage it." From 2C, Douglas Pratt had turned around in his seat, now facing the rear, with the settled interest of a man who has found something worth watching. He had his drink in one hand and his elbow on the back of the seat. "Look," he said, with the air of someone offering wisdom, "nobody wants a scene. Some people just, you know." He waved his drink hand vaguely. "Some things are not for everyone. No offense." The words "no offense" hung in the cabin air. The Harrises in row 3 both looked up at the same moment. It was the first time either of them had broken from their mutual project of not seeing anything. Patricia Harris's face had gone through something. Gerald Harris looked at his hands. Neither of them spoke. Carmen Vega in the galley doorway had both hands flat on the counter behind her. She was watching Douglas Pratt. She was watching Renee. Something that had been a vague urgency since boarding had crystallized into something specific and cold. Renee turned back to Nadine. The veneer was thinner now. Her voice had dropped, and what it had lost in volume it had gained in something else, a directness that stripped away the last of the policy-shaped language and got to what was underneath. "I have asked you politely," she said. "I have asked you through official procedure. I am asking you one final time. Remove yourself from this cabin, or I will remove you." Nadine looked at her. "You do not have that authority," she said. The cabin was completely still. Douglas Pratt had stopped mid-sip. The Harrises were not looking at their hands anymore. Marcus Holloway had his pen on the page. Carmen's right hand had found the edge of the galley counter and was holding it. Renee's hand moved. It was fast, the way only truly certain people act. People who have never once imagined being wrong about something. People for whom consequences have always been what happened to other people. Her hand moved, and the sound of the slap filled the cabin again. The same sound that opened this story, the same sound that would echo in every subsequent decision made by every person in this cabin, and every person who would ever hear about what happened tonight. Douglas Pratt went completely still. He was not grinning now. The Harrises had both pressed back in their seats. Marcus had stopped writing. Carmen's hand tightened on the counter until her knuckles went pale. And Nadine stood in the rear of the cabin of a jet belonging to an airline that needed her money to survive, with her glasses shifted on her face from the impact of a hand that had just made the most expensive contact in Skybridge Airways history. And she reached up with 2 fingers, and she straightened her glasses, and she looked at Renee Calloway, and she said, her voice barely above a murmur, "You just made the most expensive mistake of your career. I want you to remember that I said it calmly. The difference between a threat and a statement of fact is the certainty behind it. What Renee heard was a threat. What it was a fact." Renee smoothed the front of her uniform jacket. Her chin lifted. Her voice returned to its professional register with the practiced ease of someone who has decided the incident is closed. "I'll ask you to make yourself comfortable in your seat," she said. "We'll be departing shortly." She turned and walked forward without looking back. From seat 4B, Marcus Holloway said, clearly for the record, for the cabin, for anyone who would later ask what the passengers had witnessed. "Everyone on this aircraft just saw that." Douglas Pratt looked at his drink. He did not say "no offense" this time. He did not say anything. The Harrises looked at each other. Whatever passed between them in that glance was complicated and private and arrived too late to do anything with. Nadine walked to seat 7A. She sat down. She folded her hands in her lap. She looked out the window at the rain. She breathed. Her cheek was warm where the hand had connected. She did not touch it. She breathed slowly and deliberately, the way she had learned to breathe in all the rooms that had tried to make her smaller, the way she had breathed in lobbies and boardrooms and corridors and every other place where someone had decided in under 3 seconds exactly who she was. She had given them the rope and they had taken every inch of it, and now they had done something that could not be undone. She did not look at Renee again. The accounting had begun. The cabin had gone to a kind of stillness that is different from quiet. Quiet is the absence of sound. What filled charter flight SK-114 in the moments after was something else, a suspension, a held breath, the particular atmosphere of a shared space where everyone has just witnessed something that cannot be unseen and is now privately deciding what to do with the knowledge of it. The amber lighting hummed. Renee had moved to the forward galley. She was visible through the partition, opening her back to the cabin, doing something with the service cart that required no actual attention, moving things that did not need moving, creating the appearance of occupation. Her shoulders were set. Her spine was straight. She was in the architecture of her own certainty, still correct. Tom Girardi's head appeared briefly in the cockpit doorway. He looked at Renee's back. He looked at the cabin. His gaze passed over Nadine in 7A and continued forward without stopping. He withdrew. The cockpit door closed. He had been told something. Whatever it was, it had been enough. Douglas Pratt was no longer sprawling in his seat. He had rearranged himself into something more vertical. Elbows off the armrests, drink lowered to his knee. Eyes directed at the headrest in front of him, with the focused discomfort of a man who has just discovered that entertainment has a texture he did not anticipate. He had gone quiet in the way that very loud people go quiet when they realize the room has shifted around them, not apologetically, not reflectively, just suddenly aware that the space for what he had been doing has contracted without warning. He did not look at the rear of the cabin. The Harrises had turned to each other and were having the quiet, close conversation of people who have seen something and are now negotiating its meaning. Gerald Harris's face carried something that might have been shame if it had arrived 30 minutes earlier. It had arrived now, which was better than never and worse than when it was needed. Patricia Harris glanced back at Nadine once. Their eyes did not meet. In seat 4B, Marcus Holloway had not moved since saying what he said. His notebook was open. His pen was on the page. He looked at Nadine with the steady, deliberate attention of a man who has decided this moment deserves a witness and has appointed himself. He wrote for 3 minutes without looking up. Carmen Vega had not returned to the bar cart. She stood at the galley entrance with both hands at her sides and her face carrying the particular expression of someone who has just watched something she is not sure she is going to be able to make her peace with. She looked at Nadine in 7A. She looked at Renee's back. She looked at Nadine again. Nadine was looking out the window. Her hands were folded in her lap. Her back was straight. Her breathing was slow and deliberate, and to anyone watching closely intentional, not the breathing of shock or distress, but the breathing of someone managing something interior with great and practiced care. She did not look like someone who had just been struck. She looked like someone who was deciding something. Renee came back through the cabin with the pre-departure service. Drinks for Douglas, who accepted his without the easy authority he had had 20 minutes earlier. Mineral water for the Harrises, who thanked her with an overcompensating warmth that was its own kind of statement. A pre-flight snack tray that she carried to the front set on the service ledge, and from which she assembled small ceramic bowls of warmed mixed nuts for the forward passengers. She did not go to the rear of the cabin. She did not bring anything to seat 7A. Carmen watched this. She picked up a bottle of still water from the galley cart. She turned toward the rear. She had taken 2 steps into the cabin aisle when Renee appeared at the galley entrance and looked at her. Not a word. Just the look. The look that 9 years of seniority gives you, the look that means do not and contains within it the implicit remainder of everything that follows from do not. Carmen stopped. She looked at the water bottle in her hand. She looked at Nadine in 7A. She looked at Renee. She walked back to the galley. She put the water bottle down on the counter. She stood very still for a moment, both hands flat on the cold surface, and she breathed. Nadine had watched all of this. She had seen Carmen pick up the water. She had seen the look. She had seen Carmen put it down. She looked back out the window. The jet's engines had begun their pre-departure cycling, a low-rising hum that traveled through the fuselage and through the leather seats and through the feet of every person in the cabin. The rain was still coming down. The hangar lights threw long yellow reflections across the wet tarmac. Marcus Holloway said quietly from 4B in a voice addressed to no one specific and everyone present, "I've flown 47 Skybridge flights." A pause. "This is the last one." No one responded. Renee walked forward and spoke briefly into the cockpit intercom. A moment later, Tom's voice came over the cabin speaker system in the neutral practiced tone of pre-departure announcements, and the aircraft began to move. They were airborne at 12:09 a.m. as the wheels lifted and the city fell away below the rain-streaked windows. Nadine Okafor sat in seat 7A and breathed and looked out at the receding lights and did not reach for her phone. Not yet. She needed to watch first. She needed to see how far they were willing to go. She had a theory about the people who run rooms like this, the Renees and the Toms and the institutions that build them and protect them. She had a theory tested over 20 years and 40 cities and more moments like this one than she could count. The theory was this given room to operate, they will always show you exactly who they are. She had given them the room. She was going to let them show her. The city disappeared into cloud. The amber lighting hummed. The cedar smell of the upholstery settled around her. Seat 7A was not seat 2A, and the water she had been refused was still somewhere on a galley cart where a young woman had put it down because a look had told her to. Nadine looked at the cloud outside the window. She looked at her hands folded in her lap. She waited. "Before we go any further, I want to stop for just a second, because I want to ask you something, and I want you to really think about it. Have you ever been in a room, a store, an office, a restaurant, a plane, and known before you said a single word that someone had already decided who you were, not from anything you'd done, not from anything you'd said, just from what they saw in the first 3 seconds, just from the way their expression changed the moment they looked at you? If that's ever happened to you, if you know exactly what that moment feels like, tell me in the comments. Drop your city. Tell me your story. I want to hear it. And if this story is hitting the way I think it is, if Nadine's stillness, her patience, the way she is choosing to respond, if that means something to you, hit subscribe right now and stay with us, because what this woman does in the next 11 hours is something you need to see. You need to see what real power looks like when it's patient. Now, let's talk about who Nadine Okafor actually is, because you deserve to know. She was born the third of 4 children in a row house in East Baltimore with a backyard the size of a parking space and a kitchen that always smelled like something either cooking or recently cooked. Her mother, Gloria, worked as an administrative assistant at a hospital system for 19 years. Not a doctor, not a nurse, not anyone the hospital's marketing materials featured, but the person who made the paperwork work, who knew every form and every system and every shortcut, and who was paid for 19 years a salary that required her to be precise about groceries. She was unfailingly precise about groceries. She was unfailingly precise about everything. It was the most important thing she taught Nadine, though she never taught it as a lesson. She just lived it every day in the specificity with which she approached every problem that could be solved with enough attention. Her father worked construction until his back gave out and then worked dispatch for a trucking company until his eyes made the screens difficult, and then worked part-time at a hardware store. Not because there was not more pride in having worked construction, but because there was also pride in continuing to provide, and he never confused the two. Nadine was the kind of student that exists at the intersection of ability and hunger, the combination that certain teachers recognize immediately and invest in, and that certain others find threatening and manage downward. She learned to read both impulses. She learned that being recognized was useful but not reliable, that the teachers who saw her would rotate, and the system that surrounded them would not change with them, and that the only education worth having was the one that could not be taken back. She got into a finance program at a state university on a merit scholarship with a maintenance requirement of a 3.8 grade average. She maintained a 4.1. She graduated. She walked into a financial sector that looked at her resume with something she would later describe as surprise that wanted to be invisible. The faint, practiced recalibration of people confronted with information that does not match their expectation. She absorbed this. She had no choice but to absorb it. The alternative to absorbing it was named and made visible, and named and visible things have costs that not everyone can afford. She absorbed it, and she kept moving. The moment that changed everything happened on a Tuesday in March. She was 27 years old. She had been working at a mid-sized financial services firm for 3 years, building a track record that her supervisors were perfectly happy to acknowledge in private and failed to acknowledge in rooms that counted. She had identified on her own time, using her own analysis, a small portfolio opportunity in regional logistics that would later be recognized as the kind of insight that announces careers. She had pitched it internally. It had been credited to someone else. She had pitched it again to a senior partner named Gerald Whitmore at a private equity firm on Michigan Avenue in Chicago. Gerald had liked her numbers enough to respond to her email. He had liked her follow-up enough to schedule a meeting. He had scheduled the meeting for a Tuesday at 2 o'clock, confirmed twice, confirmed a third time the morning of. Nadine arrived at the Michigan Avenue building at 1:48 p.m. in a charcoal blazer and pressed dark trousers and the shoes she had bought specifically because they communicated the right combination of serious and approachable. She had the pitch on a tablet and in a printed folder. She had rehearsed it until it lived in her body rather than her head. She walked through the glass doors into the marble lobby. The receptionist looked up. Her eyes moved over Nadine in the way that Renee Calloway's would 17 years later, practiced fast total. She said pleasantly, but with the particular finality of someone stating a fact. "The service entrance is around the back, left side of the building." Nadine said, "I have a 2:00 meeting with Gerald Whitmore." The receptionist looked at her. She picked up the phone. She made a call. Nadine could not hear what she said. 4 minutes later, during which Nadine stood in the lobby in her charcoal blazer with her pitch in her hands and 2 security guards standing 6 feet away as though they had materialized from the marble, Gerald Whitmore came through the elevator doors. How was a tall man in his late 50s with the particular ease of someone who has spent his career being right. He walked toward the lobby and he saw Nadine, and then he looked at the folder in her hands and something crossed his face that was too brief and too composed to be named, and he stopped in the middle of the lobby with her folder in his mind and her standing in front of him, and he said quietly, "Maybe next quarter." He turned around. He got back in the elevator. The doors closed. Nadine stood in the lobby for 90 seconds. Not because she did not understand what had happened. She understood precisely what had happened. She stood for 90 seconds because she needed to make a decision before she left the building, and she had learned from her mother that decisions made in haste by angry people are rarely the decisions that hold. She decided in those 90 seconds standing in a marble lobby with 2 security guards watching her that she would never again ask to be let into a room she deserved to own. She would own the rooms. Not that lobby specifically, but the next one, and the one after that. She would not petition the institutions that had decided who she was based on what they saw in 3 seconds. She would build the institutions. She would hold the equity. She would be the person at the other end of the line who other people needed to call. She walked out of the building. She went home. She opened a new document. She began to build. The early years of Okafor Capital Group were not romantic. They were a single rented desk in a shared office space in a building that smelled of industrial carpet cleaner and someone else's takeout lunch. They were spreadsheets built by hand at 2 a.m. because she could not yet afford the software that would build them automatically. They were phone calls to people who did not call back and emails to people who responded with the particular courtesy reserved for things being politely declined. They were her first acquisition. A struggling logistics firm in Ohio that everyone with a professional opinion told her was a bad investment too. Capital intensive too, operationally complex, no clear path to return, that she turned around in 18 months by doing the thing she was better at than anyone she had ever met, paying attention to what was actually there, rather than what people assumed should be there. The profit from Ohio funded the next 2 acquisitions. Those funded 3 more. By the time Nadine was 37, Okafor Capital Group was managing a portfolio across 4 industries and employing a team of 22 people who worked in a real office with real software and a coffee machine that did not require quarters. By 41, she appeared briefly and without fanfare on a list of self-made billionaires published in a financial magazine. She was too busy to read. She did not celebrate. She read the piece 6 weeks later on a flight and found it reasonably accurate and moved on. She did not perform. She had grown up around people who performed wealth they did not have, and she had always found it exhausting, the performance and the watching of it. She moved quietly. She built quietly. She invested through holding vehicles with names that appeared on no press release and meant nothing to anyone who was not paying very close attention. She invested in aviation logistics real estate technology. She invested in companies that did not know the name behind the fund that held their shares. She invested in companies that needed her and did not know it. Skybridge Airways was one of them. She had begun watching Skybridge 14 months ago, not because it was a great company. It was not. It was a company with good bones and bad management, with a fleet of well-maintained aircraft and a leadership structure that had been making incremental wrong decisions for long enough that the increments had compounded into something requiring significant outside intervention to correct. It needed $280 million to survive its restructuring. Its board knew this. Her team had been in quiet negotiations with them for 7 months. The contracts had been reviewed 4 times. The terms were agreed. The signing was scheduled for 9 o'clock tomorrow morning. She had not intended to fly Skybridge tonight. The storm had not been in the forecast when she booked her commercial seat 3 days ago. She had not announced herself when she booked the charter seat 2 hours ago. She never did. Because she had believed for 20 years, had confirmed it again and again, that the truest test of any company was not what it did when it knew it was being watched. It was what it did at midnight in the rain when a woman in a burgundy hoodie came up the stairs alone. She had her answer now. She had been given her answer in the first 3 seconds before she had said a word, in the practiced sweep of Renee Calloway's eyes over her hoodie and her canvas bag, and the absence of anything that Renee recognized as mattering. She had been given her answer again in 18 minutes of booking verification, and again in a phone retained without consent, and again in a snack tray passed without eye contact, and again in a water bottle put down because a look said, "Do not." And again, finally and irreversibly, in the sound of a hand making contact with her face in a cabin full of witnesses. She had her answer. Nadine Okafor sat in seat 7A as the city disappeared into cloud below the wings of charter flight SK-114, and she folded her hands in her lap and she breathed slowly and she waited. She had one more thing she needed to see. She needed to see how far they were willing to go. At cruise altitude, the amber lighting settled into its nighttime mode. Softer, warmer, the kind of light designed to encourage sleep or the pleasant suspension of awareness that passes for relaxation on late-night flights. Renee ran the forward cabin as though the rear did not exist. She did this with the seamless efficiency of a person who has decided that something is not there and has trained every muscle of her professional demeanor to confirm that decision. She moved between the forward rows with the focused, unhurried attention of genuinely excellent service, refilling Douglas Pratt's glass before he had to ask, offering the Harrises a selection from the hot snack menu, adjusting the cabin temperature when Gerald Harris mentioned it was slightly warm. She was to the forward cabin flawless. She passed seat 7A twice in the first 20 minutes of cruise without a glance. Not the pointed not glancing of someone making an effort. The effortless, complete not seeing of someone for whom the rear of the cabin had ceased to register as occupied. The snack service came. Douglas Pratt received his warm mixed nuts in a ceramic bowl with silver tongs, offered with the particular attentiveness of someone who has identified a preferred customer. He accepted them with the easy entitlement of a man who expects exactly this and finds it unremarkable. The Harrises received a selection of artisan crackers and a small cheese board which Patricia Harris thanked Renee for with the overwarm gratitude of someone trying to compensate for something they have not addressed directly. The tray came down the aisle. Renee reached seat 7A. She did not slow her pace. She reached to the tray as she passed and slid a foil-wrapped cracker packet onto the armrest of Nadine's seat without making eye contact, without turning her head, without acknowledging the seat's occupant, the precise movement of someone navigating around a piece of furniture that requires minor adjustment to walk past. She continued forward. The cracker packet sat on the armrest. Nadine looked at it. She did not touch it. She looked at it for a moment with the dispassionate attention of a scientist examining a data point, and then she looked back out the window. Below, the cloud cover had opened briefly and the lights of the coast were visible in long broken strings. From 2C, Douglas Pratt said to no one in particular, but with the satisfied amplitude of a man who has found his comfort. "This is what I'm talking about. This is how you run a flight." He raised his ceramic bowl slightly in the direction of the forward galley, a toast to the invisible Renee. "Some airlines you have to beg for nuts in a bag. Terrible." He looked toward the rear of the cabin as he said this. The look was casual, pointed by implication. Marcus Holloway in 4B turned from the window to look at Nadine. He had not spoken since his statement at takeoff. He was still watching. His notebook was in his breast pocket, and his pen was capped, and he was doing the thing he was best at, which was being a reliable witness to things people preferred to believe had not been witnessed. He turned back to the window. From the galley, Carmen Vega had watched the snack service. She had watched Renee pass seat 7A. She had watched the foil packet land on the armrest. She had watched Nadine look at it and look away. She picked up a glass of still water from the galley cart. 90 milliliters, a small glass, the kind they gave every passenger as standard welcome. She had given one to Douglas Pratt when he boarded. She had given one to the Harrises. She had not given one to Nadine because when Nadine boarded, the situation had already moved into the territory where standard service had been suspended by something that was not a policy. She turned and walked 2 steps into the cabin aisle. Renee appeared at the galley entrance. She had come from the forward section silently, and she was standing in the entrance with her hands at her sides and her eyes on Carmen with an expression that contained everything Carmen needed to know in a single long look. Carmen stopped. The glass of water was in her hand. She looked at the glass. She looked at Renee. She looked at the woman in seat 7A who was looking out the window and had not seen any of this. She put the glass down on the galley ledge. She walked back into the galley. Renee said nothing. She returned to the forward section. Nadine from 7A had not turned from the window, but she had seen the galley entrance in the reflection of the glass, the young woman with the water glass, the appearance of the senior attendant, the glass going back to the ledge. She had seen all of it. She breathed slowly. 10 minutes later, a second drink service. Renee offered Douglas a choice of 3 spirits with the particular warmth of a host rather than a flight attendant. He chose something and she poured it, and they exchanged the easy pleasantries of 2 people who have found their comfort level with each other. The Harrises received their requested sparkling water served in glass with ice. Renee moved past 7A. Nadine raised her hand, quietly. She raised it the way you raise your hand in a classroom, simply without drama, in the expectation of being acknowledged. Renee's gaze moved past it without stopping. Nadine held her hand up. Renee was already 3 steps forward, returning to the galley. "Excuse me," Nadine said. Quiet, completely clear. Renee paused. She turned. Her expression was the practiced neutrality of someone containing something. "Could I have some water, please?" It was not a question. It was not a complaint. It was a simple adult sentence containing a simple adult request for a thing that every other person on this aircraft had received without asking. "I'm afraid water service is limited to premium-tier passengers during the cruise portion of the flight," Renee said. "I apologize for the inconvenience." She turned back toward the galley. Marcus Holloway said clearly, "That is not a policy." Renee paused. "That is not a real policy," Marcus said. I have flown Skybridge 47 times. I have never once heard that stated on any flight. Renee turned to him with the professional expression she had maintained all evening, the one that contained everything and revealed nothing, and was in its completeness its own statement. I appreciate your feedback, sir. Skybridge service standards vary by... She is a passenger on this aircraft who has paid full fare, Marcus said. She asked for water. You gave the couple in row 3 sparkling water in a glass with ice without being asked. I'm asking you to explain the difference. The cabin was quiet. The Harrises had both gone rigid again. Gerald Harris was looking at Marcus with an expression that was somewhere between discomfort and something that might, given another 30 years of practice, become courage. From 2C, Douglas Pratt said without looking up, maybe some passengers are just more trouble than they're worth. Crew's just doing their job. Nadine looked at the seat back in front of her. She breathed. Marcus looked at Douglas with an expression that was patient and complete, and contained an evaluation of Douglas Pratt that Douglas Pratt would never fully receive, but that was accurate in every particular. Renee said to the cabin, generally, I'll see what I can do. She disappeared into the galley. She did not bring water to seat 7A. She brought after 3 minutes a small foil packet of crackers, the same kind she had slid onto the armrest during snack service, which she set on the tray table without eye contact and walked away from. The glass of water sat on the galley ledge. Carmen stood 6 feet from it and did not touch it. Nadine looked at the cracker packet on her tray table. She thought about the meeting with Gerald Whitmore's receptionist in the Chicago lobby. She thought about the security guard. She thought about the 90 seconds of standing in the marble and deciding. She thought about the spreadsheets at 2 a.m. She thought about Ohio. She thought about 20 years of carefully, precisely, patiently building something that could not be taken from her, that did not depend on anyone's recognition that existed in the structure of things, rather than in anyone's opinion of her. She thought about the $280 million that was scheduled to save the airline that employed Renee Calloway and Tom Girardi and everyone who ran this aircraft and this company. She looked out the window. The city had begun to appear again, the first scattered lights of approach, the familiar pattern of a place she knew. They were not far now. 40 minutes, maybe less. She reached into her hoodie pocket. She found her phone. She did not open it yet. She held it in her hand in her pocket and she breathed. She had one more thing she needed to watch. Douglas Pratt stood up. He did it the way certain men stand up, with the unhurried certainty of someone who occupies whatever space he moves into as a matter of right rather than consideration. He set his glass on the tray table, pushed himself to his feet, and stretched his arms above his head with the expansive ease of a man at home everywhere. He walked the aisle, forward to the galley where he exchanged a few words with Renee that came with the easy warmth of two people who have been moving through the world in the same direction for the duration of a flight. He accepted something, a small wrapped chocolate from the galley cart. He turned. He walked back down the aisle. He passed Marcus in 4B. He passed the empty seats in 5 and 6. He arrived at seat 7A. He did not sit down. He stood at the row, one hand on the headrest of the empty 7B, his body angled in the particular geometry of a large man in a narrow space who has not made any accommodation for the person already in it. He stood there. Nadine looked at the window. You know, Douglas said in the conversational tone of someone who believes the conversation has been invited, low but not quiet, carrying back to Marcus and forward to the Harrises without effort. I've been doing these charter runs for about 6 years. Back and forth, coast to coast, same faces sometimes. You get a feel for how these things go. He paused. Nadine did not respond. She did not look at him. Good crews, bad crews, passengers who get it, and passengers who... He inhaled through his nose in the way of a man choosing with apparent reluctance not to finish a sentence. Do not quite understand the environment they're in. You know what I mean? He was looking at the seat back in front of 7A as he said this. He was not looking at Nadine. He did not need to. Anyway, he pushed off the headrest. Just, you know, everyone knows where they belong. That's all I'm saying. He straightened up, adjusted his blazer. Just saying. He walked back to 2C. He retrieved his glass from the tray table. He sat down. Renee in the galley entrance had seen all of this. She did not say anything. She did not return to the aisle. She picked up a service cloth and folded it with the careful attention of someone who has not just watched what she watched. Marcus Holloway said from 4B in a voice with no particular elevation but a very specific direction, "Sir." Douglas turned. "What you just said," Marcus said, "was not acceptable." Douglas looked at Marcus with the measured inconvenience of a man encountering a minor obstacle. "I was not talking to you." "No," Marcus said. "But I heard you. And I'd like you to know that I heard you and that I'm going to remember exactly what you said. Word for word." Douglas looked at him for a moment. "Good for you," he said pleasantly and turned back to the front. In the galley, Carmen Vega had her hands flat on the counter. She was breathing through her nose in the deliberate way of someone managing something that is pressing against the inside of her chest with increasing urgency. She looked at the door of the storage cabinet under the counter. She looked at the cabin tablet mounted at the galley station. She had been trying to do something on that tablet for 30 minutes. Every time she moved toward it, there was something else to do, or Renee was in the galley, or the departure sequence had required her attention. But the feeling that had started as a vague pressing impression when Nadine walked up the stairs had built over the course of this flight into something she could no longer defer. She had seen that face before. She was almost certain she had. In something she had read. Something that mattered. Tom Girardi appeared. Renee had called him. Carmen had not seen the call, but she knew the cadence, the particular sequence that meant Renee had activated the mechanism of official procedure. Tom came through the cockpit door with his clipboard and his expression of bureaucratic certainty, and he walked to the rear of the cabin for the second time tonight. He stopped at row 7. "Ma'am," he said, "I've received a report that a passenger in this section has been making the cabin environment uncomfortable for other travelers. I want to give you the opportunity to address that before we land." Nadine looked at him. She looked at him for a long moment. "A passenger in this section," she said. "That's correct. I'm the only person in this section. I understand that. I have been seated in this seat since before takeoff," Nadine said. "I have not left this seat. I have not raised my voice. I have not made physical contact with anyone. I asked for water, which was refused. A passenger from row 2 came to this row uninvited and made statements that Marcus Holloway in seat 4B will confirm he heard clearly. I have done nothing." Tom wrote something on his clipboard. "I'll note your statement," he said. "Note all of it," Nadine said. "Note the water refusal. Note the passenger from row 2. Note the time. Note everything. Of course. Are you going to note the statement he made?" Tom looked up. "The passenger in row 2, Nadine said. "Are you going to note what he said to me?" A pause. "I'll speak with all parties," Tom said. He walked back toward the front. He did not stop at 2C. Renee emerged from the galley with a service tray and moved smoothly through the forward section, offering the Harrises a warm towel with the genuine attentiveness of someone whose hospitality was in its forward-facing direction entirely sincere. She passed seat 7A. She did not slow. As she passed, she moved the service cart, the one parked at the end of the row section. Very slightly forward, a small, precise repositioning that left it sitting directly at the opening of Nadine's row in a way that made exiting the seat require deliberate effort. Not enough to be an obstacle in any formal sense, just enough to be felt, just enough to say without saying you are not moving freely in this space. Marcus Holloway watched this from 4B. He opened his notebook. He wrote 3 lines. He capped his pen. He looked at the back of Renee's head as she moved forward. "I've flown 47 Skybridge flights," he said quietly to himself, or to the cabin, or to the record he was building. "This is going to be a significant 48th. The city was closer now. The approach lights were beginning below, the long amber strips of the runway system visible through the cloud breaks. 25 minutes to landing, maybe less. The Harrises had gone entirely quiet. Gerald Harris had his hands in his lap and was looking at them with the focused attention of a man who has recognized some time in the last 30 minutes that the choice to not engage is itself a choice and is no longer comfortable with it, and does not know what to do with that discomfort at this altitude with this little time left. Patricia Harris was looking at the window on her side. Douglas Pratt was asleep, or performing sleep. Either way, his eyes were closed and his drink was empty, and he had achieved the particular unconcern of a man who has said his piece and found the rest of the evening beneath his interest. Nadine sat with her hands in her lap. Below, in the growing grid of city lights, she could see the shape of the street where she had grown up. She always looked for it on approach, had for 20 years, even when she was not sure why. It was still there. Of course it was still there. She reached into her hoodie pocket. She found her phone. She looked at it in her hand. She thought about what she needed to do. She thought about the order of things and the timing of things and the specific language she would use, and she thought about Sylvia Reyes, who would be awake regardless of the hour because Sylvia was always awake when something required precision. She thought about Donna Park, who picked up on the first ring. She thought about 4 words. She thought one more thing. There was one more thing she needed to do on this aircraft before it landed and before she made her calls and before the machinery she had built over 20 years was set in motion. She needed to do one more thing. She put her phone back in her pocket. She looked at the lights coming up through the rain. 20 minutes. I want to stop here for just a second, because I want to ask you something and I want you to really think about it. If you had the power, not the power to make a scene, not the power to fight back, not the power to go viral, but the real, structural, permanent power to respond to something like this in a way that could not be undone, what would you do? Not what you'd want to do in the heat of the moment, not what anger would tell you to do. What would you actually do if you had the patience and the position and the precision to do it right? Tell me in the comments. I want to know. And if you haven't subscribed yet, do it now, right now. Because what Nadine does in the next 20 minutes on this aircraft before it even lands, and what happens in the 11 hours that follow, is going to change the way you think about what quiet strength really means. She is about to walk the length of this cabin, and she is going to say one sentence. Stay with us. Carmen Vega was in the galley when the feeling stopped being a feeling and became a certainty. She had been restocking the bar cart for the 3rd time that flight. Not because it needed restocking, but because her hands needed something to do, something procedural and specific that would let the rest of her keep functioning, while the part of her that had been pressing toward an answer since boarding continued its work. She was counting individual serving bottles of still water. She had counted them twice already. She counted them a 3rd time. Renee was in the forward section, running landing preparation. Carmen reached for the cabin tablet. She had reached for it 4 times in the last hour and retreated each time. Once when Renee appeared, once when the snack service required her attention, twice out of the simple and specific fear of what she might find and what she would be required to do with it. She reached for it now. She opened the Skybridge passenger manifest for flight SK-114. There were 4 names. She scrolled to the last one. Okafor Nadine. She held the tablet and stared at the name. She had seen this name before. She was certain she had seen this name before. She opened Skybridge's internal VIP and investor portal. She had access to it through a login that Renee had used on her tablet months ago and had never logged out of a small administrative accident that Carmen had never mentioned and had never imagined needing to use. She searched the name. The satellite connection was slow flickering in the weather. The loading circle rotated. Carmen stood in the galley with the tablet in her hands and the bar cart behind her and the counting of water bottles forgotten, and she waited. The page loaded. She read it. She read it again. She set the tablet flat on the galley counter and pressed both palms down on the cold surface and breathed. Nadine Okafor, founder and managing partner, Okafor Capital Group. Active portfolio aviation logistics technology real estate. At the top of the investor file, flagged in bold, active negotiation, Skybridge Airways, pending strategic investment, $280 million, scheduled signing 0900. Carmen read the number once. She read it again. $280 million, scheduled for 9 o'clock tomorrow morning. The woman in the burgundy hoodie in seat 7A. The woman Renee had slapped. The woman who had been refused water. The woman whose phone had been taken and whose seat had been reassigned and around whom a service cart had been positioned as a small, precise statement. She picked up the tablet. She walked to the forward galley. Renee was at the service counter reviewing the landing checklist. She looked up when Carmen appeared. Her expression was efficient, end of flight already passed this evening and into the logistics of what followed. Carmen held out the tablet. "I need you to see this," she said. Her voice was not quite steady. Renee looked at the screen. She looked at it for longer than Carmen expected, long enough that Carmen thought for a moment that it was landing the way it should land. Then Renee looked up. "Anyone can put anything in a database," she said. Her voice carried the calm patience of someone explaining something simple to someone young. "You know that." "This is our own investor portal," Carmen said. "This is Skybridge's internal system. Profiles can be fabricated. People have done it before." Renee handed the tablet back. "This is exactly the kind of thing a difficult passenger does to create a situation and then claim they had a right to be treated differently." "Renee, drop it." The patience had thinned slightly. What was underneath was not anger. It was something colder. The absolute certainty of a person who has decided the facts are wrong rather than the conclusion. And if you pulled a passenger file without authorization, that's a conduct violation. "Are we clear?" Carmen looked at her. She looked at the tablet in her hands. She looked at Renee. She said yes. She turned and walked back through the cabin, past the Harrises, past Marcus in 4B, who watched her pass with the still attention of someone who notices the quality of how people move when they have just made a decision, to the rear of the cabin. She crouched beside seat 7A. Nadine turned from the window. Carmen looked at her. Her voice was very quiet. "I'm sorry," she said. "I'm sorry for all of it. I should have said something earlier. I'm sorry." She held the tablet out. "I found your profile. I know who you are." Nadine looked at her for a moment. "You're saying something now," she said. "That's what matters." She asked Carmen one question. "Is your name attached to anything that happened tonight? Any report? Any note? Anything official?" Carmen said, "No, not yet." Nadine said, "Keep it clean tonight. Do not put yourself in the middle of anything. You'll understand why tomorrow." She looked at Carmen steadily. "What you just did, what you tried to do, I saw it. All of it. The water, the galley, every time." Carmen nodded. She stood up. She walked back toward the galley. She sat on the jump seat with the tablet in her lap. She thought about what Renee had said. A conduct violation, are we clear? And she thought about what she had seen tonight. And she thought about the woman in seat 7A who had been slapped in the face on an aircraft this woman likely could purchase and who had sat with her hands folded and her glasses straight and her breathing steady through everything that followed. She picked up the tablet. She opened the incident report form. She began to type. She wrote everything, every timestamp, every exchange. Renee's words at the boarding door, the booking verification, the retained phone, the snack tray sliding past without eye contact, the water refused, Douglas Pratt at the row, Tom's visit with the clipboard that noted nothing, the service cart positioned at the row entrance. She attached the investor profile screenshot. She attached the passenger manifest. She time-stamped everything. She addressed it to 3 recipients: the Director of Passenger Services, the Head of HR, and the Office of Skybridge Airways CEO Richard Fallon. She looked at what she had written. She looked at the send button. She thought about what Nadine had said. Do not put yourself in the middle of anything. She thought about what she had seen tonight. She thought about the woman who had asked for water and received crackers. She thought about Renee's hand. She pressed send. The timestamp read, 12:18 a.m. Carmen put the tablet face down on the jump seat. She sat very still in the way a person sits after they have done something they cannot take back. She breathed. She thought, I did the right thing. I did the right thing. I should have done it sooner, but I did it now. She breathed. I did the right thing. The seatbelt sign chimed. 15 minutes to landing. The runway lights had begun their long, organized approach below the windows, amber and white and arranged with the specific precision of things designed to bring you in safely. The city was close. The rain was still coming down. Nadine unfolded her hands. She reached up and touched the clasp of her seatbelt. She unclipped it. She stood. She stood in the rear of the cabin of charter flight SK-114 in her burgundy hoodie and her wire-rimmed glasses and the shoes she had put on 22 hours ago in a different city, and she walked. She walked the length of the cabin, past the empty rows, past Marcus Holloway in 4B, who looked up as she passed with an expression that was not surprise. He had been waiting for something she sensed, and this was it. Past the Harrises in 3A and 3B, both of whom registered her movement and went slightly more rigid. Past Douglas Pratt in 2C, who had opened one eye and watched her pass with the speculative attention of someone who has decided not to speak. She walked to the forward galley entrance where Renee Calloway was completing the landing preparation checklist, going through the items with the precise, habituated attention of someone who has done this procedure hundreds of times. Renee looked up. Her chin lifted. The professional composure was fully in place. Complete polish the surface undamaged by everything that had happened on this flight. Whatever the foundation of Renee's certainty was built from it was still holding. "You should be seated," she said. "We're in final descent." "I'll sit in a moment," Nadine said. "I want you to hear something first. I need to ask you to return to your seat." "I will." Nadine stood in the galley entrance. She was not blocking anything. She was not threatening. She was simply present, the way she had been present at the top of the stairs at the boarding door at seat 2A, with her hand holding a confirmed booking confirmation. Simply, entirely, undeniably there. "I want you to understand something before this flight lands," she said. Her voice was at conversation volume. The forward section of the cabin could hear it. She was not performing for them. She was simply not concealing. Renee said nothing. "Everything that happened on this aircraft tonight has been documented," Nadine said. "The boarding, the booking verification, the retained phone, the statements made by your colleague in row 2, the service tray, the water refusal, the cart positioned at my row. A pause. All of it. Your own system. A member of your crew. A passenger who keeps notes professionally. And me." Renee's expression held. "Are you threatening me?" "No," Nadine said. "I'm telling you what's already true. There's a difference." The cockpit door opened. Tom Girardi appeared in the doorway, looking between Renee and Nadine with the expression of someone who has been monitoring a situation and has decided this requires his presence. "Is there a problem?" he said. Nadine turned to look at him. "Yes," she said. "There was. It's been documented." She looked at them both. Tom with his clipboard hand already rising. Renee with her chin lifted and her checklist in her hands. And she held their combined gaze for 3 seconds. Then she said, "You should know the name of the person you treated this way tonight. You should know it before morning." She held the moment for one more beat. Then she turned and walked back through the cabin. Past Douglas, who was fully awake now, both eyes open, watching her pass with an expression she did not look at. Past the Harrises, both of whom watched her with the stricken attention of people who have understood something too late. Past Marcus Holloway, who did not look away and whose notebook was in his hand. She returned to seat 7A. She sat down. She clipped her seatbelt. She folded her hands in her lap. She looked out the window at the runway lights coming up below. From seat 4B, Marcus Holloway said very quietly, "To no one in particular, or to everyone to the record, or to the ceiling. There it is." In the forward galley, Renee Calloway stood with her checklist in her hands. She had not moved since Nadine walked away. Her chin was still lifted. Her professional composure was still in place technically. All the correct muscles were doing their correct things. And from the outside, if you were not paying very close attention, she looked the same as she had looked all evening. But something had changed. Not in her face exactly. Not in the angle of her chin or the set of her shoulders. In something behind her eyes. A quality that had been there all evening. That bedrock, unquestioned, unchallengeable certainty had developed something. Not a crack. Not yet. More like a hairline. more like the first microfracture that tells a structural engineer, if they're paying attention, that there is pressure being applied from a direction that had not been accounted for. She had looked at Nadine and said, "Are you threatening me?" And she had heard herself say it. And for the first time in this entire flight, she had not been completely certain she was asking the right question. She looked at the checklist. The words were there: pre-landing, cabin secure, seats upright, tray tables stowed, service equipment stowed. They were the same words they had been before Nadine walked up the aisle, and Renee knew them all, and she went through them item by item with the practiced efficiency of 9 years. Carmen Vega, on the jump seat across the galley, watched Renee's face. She saw the microfracture. She recognized it the way you recognize something you have been waiting for without knowing you were waiting. She looked away. Tom Girardi had retreated to the cockpit. The aircraft had banked into its final approach. The runway was below, rushing up the amber and white lights, organizing themselves into something imminent and certain. Nadine looked at the window. She breathed. She thought you should know the name of the person you treated this way. It was not a threat. It was a gift in its way. The last courtesy she owed them. The chance to understand before morning what was coming. She had given them the room to operate. She had watched them operate. She had given them warnings in the language of facts. She had given them everything except what they had decided she did not deserve, and that was fine because what she had built over 20 years did not require their generosity. It only required her precision. The wheels touched down. She reached into her hoodie pocket. She found her phone. The jet touched down at 12:23 a.m. The rain was still coming down horizontal now in a wind that moved across the tarmac in long, low sheets pressing against the fuselage as the aircraft taxied from the runway to the private terminal. Inside, the landing announcement played from the cockpit in Tom Girardi's neutral voice, the same voice he had used all evening, technically correct, entirely without warmth for anyone it did not choose to warm. Renee stood at the forward exit as the aircraft parked. She had resumed her full professional posture by the time the door opened. The practiced warmth, the name-based acknowledgement, the gracious farewell that made certain passengers feel remembered. She smiled at the Harrises and thanked them by name, which startled Patricia Harris slightly, who had spent the last 20 minutes in the specific discomfort of someone who has witnessed something and has not yet decided what to do about having witnessed it. She thanked Douglas Pratt, who accepted the farewell with the easy authority of a man being accorded what he considers his due. He made a parting observation, something about how this airline knew how to treat its people, delivered in the direction of the forward cabin and pointed by the angle of his gaze toward the rear at everyone it was not meant to include. Renee offered him a gracious farewell. Nadine walked to the front of the cabin when her row was reached. She passed Renee in the doorway without looking at her. Renee looked through her. The aperture of Renee's warmth, which had operated all evening at full capacity for certain passengers, registered Nadine as it had registered her from the beginning. Not at all. Nadine walked down the stairs and across the wet tarmac. The rain hit her immediately. Her hood went flat against her head, her canvas tote darkened at the shoulder. She did not hurry. She knew where she was going. Her driver was at the edge of the private terminal, standing beside a dark car with the door held. She crossed the tarmac in the rain and got in. The door closed. The terminal lights were yellow through the rain-streaked glass. Inside the car it was warm and quiet, and for a moment Nadine sat in that warmth and said nothing and let the weight of the evening settle. She made the first call. Sylvia Reyes answered on the second ring, which meant she had been awake. Sylvia was always awake when something required precision, and she had a particular ability to recognize when that was true. "I need a withdrawal letter," Nadine said. "Full withdrawal. The Skybridge deal. Tonight." Sylvia was quiet for 1 second. The specific second of a lawyer receiving information and integrating it. Full withdrawal, no restructure. Full. No restructure. No comment. Standard language. Standard language. No explanation. "I'll have it ready by 2, Sylvia said. "Do you want delivery by 3? 3 is fine, Nadine said. "Send it to Richard Fallon's executive office. Personal." "Done," Sylvia said. She did not ask what had happened. She asked, "Are you all right?" Nadine looked out the window at the rain. "I'm fine," She ended the call. She made the second call. Donna Park picked up on the first ring. It was 12:31 a.m. Donna picked up on the first ring regardless of the hour. This was not dedication so much as the simple expression of a person who had decided that certain things were worth waking up for and had arranged her life accordingly. "Cancel the 9 o'clock, Nadine said. "All of it. Issue a formal withdrawal of the offer by 3 a.m. standard language. No explanation." "Done," Donna said. "Anything else?" Nadine looked at the city moving past the windows. She looked at the streets she had grown up on somewhere out there in the dark and the rain, the row house with the small backyard, the schools that ran short on textbooks by October, the woman who had worked double shifts for 19 years and who had taught her daughter without ever calling it a lesson what precision looked like. "No," she said. "That's all." She put the phone in her hoodie pocket. The car moved through the rain. She did not speak again for 12 minutes. Donna had learned over 5 years that the space after certain conversations needed to be respected. She sat in the front seat and looked at the city and said nothing. The most powerful thing Nadine had done tonight was also the quietest. She had gone home. Richard Fallon, CEO of Skybridge Airways, was asleep on his side when the notification pulled him up through the layers of sleep with the specific urgency of an alert he had set himself. He had set this alert because the signing was at 9 o'clock and 48 hours before a deal of this magnitude. You do not silence your phone. You set an alert for anything from Sylvia Reyes's firm, and you sleep lightly. He reached for the phone without turning on the lamp. He read the email in the blue-white light of the screen. "Dear Mr. Fallon, on behalf of Okafor Capital Group, we are writing to formally notify Skybridge Airways of the complete withdrawal of Okafor Capital Group's proposed strategic investment in the amount of $280 million. This withdrawal is effective immediately. Okafor Capital Group will not be pursuing any further discussion of this transaction at this time. We appreciate the time invested by both parties and wish Skybridge Airways well in its future endeavors." He read it again. He turned on the lamp. He read it a third time in the lamp-lit room with his wife asleep beside him and the city quiet outside the window and the specific cold settling of a man who has received information his body understood before his mind caught up. $280 million. Gone. Before market open. The deal that had taken 7 months to build, that had been reviewed 4 times by counsel, that had been the answer to every analyst's question about Skybridge's restructuring path. Gone. No explanation, no comment, no door left open. He picked up his phone. He found in the inbox of his executive assistant's account, which he was copied on by protocol, an email sent at 12:18 a.m. by C. Vega cabin crew SK-115. Subject line incident report. Flight SK-114. Requires immediate executive attention. He opened it. He read it once quickly. He read it again slowly. He opened the attached investor profile. He read the first 3 lines and closed his eyes. He opened them. He read the flight manifest. He looked at the timestamp on Carmen's email. 12:18 a.m. He looked at the timestamp on Sylvia's withdrawal letter. 3:03 a.m. He sat in the lamp-lit room for a long time. Then he picked up his phone and called the board chair. Patricia Solis, board chair of Skybridge Airways, picked up her phone at 5:30 a.m. from a bed in a hotel in another city where she had been sleeping, ahead of what she had expected to be a routine board briefing ahead of the signing. She listened to Richard Fallon for 6 minutes without speaking. Then she said, "Get everyone on a call, now." By 5:45, the general counsel was on the line. By 5:52, the head of investor relations. By 6:10, 3 board members who had been extracted from sleep in 3 different time zones were on a call together, trying to understand a single question: how, not why. They had read Carmen's report by then, or Fallon had read it to them, and the why was clear in the cold documentary clarity of a cabin crew member's time-stamped account. How? How had this happened? How had 9 years of service history produced a person who looked at a passenger and did what the report described in a cabin with 4 witnesses without anyone stopping it? The answer, which no one said aloud on the 610 call, but which everyone on it understood, was because they had been trained to believe it would not have consequences. Someone in investor relations, A person whose instinct for connectivity was better than their instinct for discretion mentioned to their assistant that there had been a development with the morning's planned announcement. The assistant mentioned it to a contact at a financial wire service. The contact ran the math. The withdrawal of an unannounced $280 million rescue investment 14 hours before a scheduled signing was not a small item. The contact published a 4-paragraph piece at 7:03 a.m. Skybridge Aviation faces uncertain morning after reported investor withdrawal. The piece was sourced to unnamed industry contacts. It was 4 paragraphs long and restrained in its language. But the language of financial news does not need to be dramatic to be devastating. The facts carry the weight. And the facts here were stark. An investment of $280 million, widely anticipated in certain financial circles, even if never formally announced, had vanished. The question being asked by 7:30 a.m. was not whether Skybridge had a problem. It was how large the problem was and how quickly the market would price it. Skybridge stock opened at its previous close. By 9:44 it had dropped 9%. The 4-paragraph piece had been picked up by 2 larger outlets. A former board member who had left Skybridge 18 months earlier over a governance dispute gave a statement that was measured and devastating in precisely equal proportion. He said that the company's challenges were not new, and that the investor withdrawal, whatever its specific cause, reflected confidence issues that the current leadership had failed to address. By 10:20, the stock was down 16%. By noon, down 23%. The company had shed, depending on the moment you measured, somewhere between $45 and $65 million of market value in a single morning. Before lunch, the board convened an emergency session at 11:00 in Skybridge's glass-walled conference room on the 38th floor. Richard Fallon sat at the head of the table. The people around him were people he had known for years, some of them decades, and they were looking at him with the specific expression that appears on the faces of experienced professionals when they have identified who is going to absorb the consequences of a disaster. Someone asked for the cabin security footage from SK-114. It took 40 minutes to locate the relevant file and load it on the conference room screen. The room watched in silence. No one spoke during the footage. No one spoke for 30 seconds after it ended. Richard Fallon, looking at the frozen final frame, said 4 words, not the most eloquent 4 words ever spoken in a boardroom, but among the most accurate. What have we done? It was not a question. It was a verdict, delivered by a man to himself in a room full of people who were equally implicated by the answer. Patricia Solis said quietly from the end of the table, "We start from the beginning. We find out every person who was on that aircraft, and we start from the beginning." Renee Calloway's company phone had stopped working at 9:01 a.m. She had been at home when it happened, sitting at her kitchen table with a coffee she had not yet touched, watching the morning come through the window with the slightly disoriented attention of someone who has not slept well and is not entirely sure why. She had picked up her phone to check the crew scheduling system and found it locked. Access denied. She had tried her company email. Locked. She had tried the Skybridge internal portal. Locked. Her personal phone buzzed. A message from an HR coordinator asking her to come to company headquarters at her earliest convenience. The word earliest underlined. She arrived at 10:40 in her full uniform because the uniform was the only armor she owned. The security guard at the reception desk asked pleasantly and without drama for her access badge. He held out his hand. She looked at it. She removed the badge from her lapel and placed it in his hand. She was escorted to a small conference room on the 2nd floor. Windowless. A table with 4 chairs. A water pitcher. 2 people from HR and 1 from legal. All 3 with the professionally neutral expression of people who have done this before and find no pleasure in it. She sat down. She believed, in those first minutes with the settled certainty of a belief so deep it had never required examination, that this was a complaint from a difficult passenger, that her 9 years of service record would be weighed, that the appropriate process would vindicate her. She said so. She said that the passenger had refused to cooperate with standard procedures, that she had maintained order, that whatever had been filed was an exaggeration of a situation she had managed correctly. The legal representative opened a folder. She removed a single printed page and slid it across the table. It was a still image from the SK-113 cabin security camera. Forward section business class. The timestamp in the lower right corner read 000847. Renee looked at it. The image was clear. Perfectly, irrefutably, undeniably clear. Something happened to her face. It was not remorse. Not yet, not in those first seconds. It was the specific physical shock of a person who has spent their entire adult life certain of something, encountering the evidence that the certainty was wrong. The floor of her conviction did not crack. It dropped. Entirely and immediately, the way a floor drops when the structure beneath it is removed. She was still looking at the image when the HR representative said, "We'll give you a moment." Nadine Okafor appeared on a financial news program at 4:00 p.m. from a chair in a studio she had been to once before 7 years ago for a conversation about a different acquisition. She was wearing a dark blazer. Her natural hair was framed by studio lighting. She looked exactly like what she was: composed, present, unhurried. The anchor, a veteran interviewer named Christine Harlow, who had sat across from elected officials and tech founders for 23 years, noted afterward that Nadine was among the most controlled subjects she had encountered in her career. She did not arrive to be managed. She arrived to say what she had come to say. Christine asked her to describe what had happened on flight SK-114. Nadine described it. She described it in the factual, specific register of someone providing a statement, not seeking sympathy, not performing emotion, not editorializing. She described the boarding, the booking verification, the retained phone, the snack tray, the water refusal, the service cart positioned at her row. She described the slap. She said all of it in the same quiet, even voice she had used all evening on that aircraft. Christine said, "How did you feel in that moment?" Nadine was quiet. For 4 seconds, she was quiet. The kind of silence that is not a pause but a gathering, of something that has been there a long time and has now been given the room to be said. "The slap is not the story," she said. "The slap is what made this visible. The story is that they looked at me and decided, in under 3 seconds, who I was and what I was worth. Not from anything I'd done, not from anything I'd said, from what they saw." She paused. "That's not a Skybridge problem. That's everywhere. I happen to be in a position to make it legible. Most people who experience this are not." Christine asked whether she would reconsider the Skybridge investment. "I've withdrawn," Nadine said, "and I won't be returning. The capital, all of it, has been redirected to a regional airline called Alder that has spent 14 months demonstrating its values in the unremarkable daily moments where values are actually tested. I visited their operations 3 times unannounced. I watched how their crew treated an elderly passenger who could not reach the overhead bin. I watched how they handled a mother traveling alone with 2 children. I watched the patience that looked genuine rather than performed." She paused. "That's the simplest possible standard. Treat people like people. It turns out to be genuinely rare." She named Alder Regional Airlines. Its stock, which was small and had received minimal coverage, increased 28% in after-hours trading that evening. Christine asked, "What do you want people to take away from this?" Nadine was quiet for a moment. "That respectful service should not be conditional on what a person can prove about their net worth," she said. "The moment you make dignity conditional, you've already failed as a company. Not legally, not in the press release. Actually, in the moment. That failure has a cost, every single time." The clip was 22 seconds long. It was the 22 seconds that moved through every corner of the public conversation for the next 72 hours. 4 weeks later, Carmen Vega almost did not answer. The number was one she did not recognize, and she had been getting unfamiliar calls for the past 3 weeks from journalists and former colleagues, and one person who had turned out to be writing a book, none of which she had agreed to speak to. She let it ring twice. Then she answered. The voice was warm and direct. It belonged to Donna Park, and it explained, without fanfare, without ceremony, that Ms. Okafor had an opening for a director of passenger experience on the newly structured Alder Regional Partnership team and that Ms. Okafor had specifically identified Carmen as someone she would like to speak with. The interview was the following Thursday. It lasted 35 minutes. Nadine asked her one question about the incident. She asked why Carmen had sent the email at 12:18 a.m. when she had been directly told not to. Carmen thought about it for a moment. Then she said that she knew what she had seen was wrong, and she also knew that if she went to sleep without acting on that knowledge, she would wake up the next morning having become someone she did not want to be. Nadine nodded slowly. She asked no further questions on that topic. The offer came the next day. Carmen accepted it in 40 minutes. Skybridge Airways did not collapse overnight. That is not how these things go. What happened instead was a sequence. The kind of slow, accelerating unraveling that begins at a single point and continues until the entire structure has revealed what it was actually made of all along. It began with the stock. It continued with the sponsors. It ended eventually somewhere much further along than anyone at that emergency board session had imagined, with a company that existed at a smaller altitude than it had before, leaner, diminished, and in the long process of deciding whether diminishment could become the foundation of something more honest. Richard Fallon submitted his resignation within the week. His letter spoke about wanting to spend time with his family, the language men use when the choice has already been made for them. He was not asked to stay. The board commissioned an external audit of Skybridge's service standards, cabin conduct protocols, and complaint handling procedures. They did this not from genuine moral urgency, though some of them may have felt that privately, but from the arithmetic of liability, which sometimes produces the same actions from different motivations. 3 crew members from SK-114 were placed on administrative suspension pending investigation: Renee, Tom Girardi, Douglas Pratt. Though he was not crew, found that his insurance company's legal department reached out to Okafor Capital Group within 10 days, proactively without being asked, which told Nadine everything she needed to know about how quickly organizations calculate exposure when the name on the other side of an incident becomes publicly known. Skybridge's 3 largest institutional investors filed requests for emergency board briefings. 2 of them sold their positions without waiting for the answers. The third stayed but sent a letter to the new interim CEO that used the words accountability framework 8 times in 4 paragraphs, which is the institutional investors' way of saying fix this or we leave too. An advocacy organization published an open letter citing 3 prior incidents of service discrimination at Skybridge over the preceding 5 years. Incidents that had been handled internally, resolved quietly, never acknowledged publicly. Those 3 incidents, invisible for years, stepped into the light of this one and were immediately, irrevocably visible. Every press statement Skybridge released in the following 2 weeks was held up against those 3 incidents and found insufficient. The company went quiet. Silence in a crisis reads as guilt, whether it is or not. Public silence in a crisis about exactly this kind of failure reads as an institution deciding that the cost of honesty is too high, which confirms the very thing the crisis was about. 2 major sponsors paused their marketing partnerships pending internal review. In sponsor language, internal review is the grace period before an exit, long enough to allow for a graceful departure, short enough that the message is received. Both sponsors completed their reviews within 3 weeks. Neither renewed. What was left of Skybridge when the dust settled was not nothing. It was a smaller company with a mandate for reform and a new leadership team, and a very long road between the institution it had been and the institution it might yet become. But $47 million in market value had not returned with them. Renee Calloway was terminated. Her employment with Skybridge Airways ended formally with a letter and a final paycheck and the revocation of all credentials and access that 9 years of service had accumulated. She found work eventually, not in aviation, not in any service industry that had reason to conduct a reference check covering the relevant period, but in something else in a different city, in the quiet that follows consequence when consequence has been complete. Whether the quiet of her new life was the quiet of a person who had genuinely understood something, or simply the quiet of someone who had absorbed the cost of a single evening, that remained even to her unclear on most mornings. Tom Girardi was suspended, investigated, and his crew certification reviewed. The review examined his conduct on SK-114 and found a pattern of deference to senior cabin crew that had, in this instance, crossed from professional compliance into something more complicit. His path back to active crew status was long and conditional. Douglas Pratt did not return to his VP position. The insurance firm's legal department had moved quickly once the story became public, quickly enough that Douglas had been on administrative leave before he had time to consider whether he had done anything wrong. He spent 6 months in that suspended state, and then the company announced a restructuring, and his position was among those eliminated. Marcus Holloway published his account of Flight SK-114 in a national travel magazine 6 weeks after the incident. He titled it, "What I Witnessed." He did not sensationalize. He wrote in the specific, clear documentary style of a person who has decided that the facts require no embellishment. It became the most read piece the magazine had published in 4 years. He received messages for months. He answered as many as he could. Carmen Vega began her role at Alder Regional within the month. Her first project was the design of what became Alder's Service Dignity Protocol, a set of practical, specific operational standards for cabin conduct that did not use the words diversity or inclusion, but contained in its specific clauses everything those words are supposed to mean when they are taken seriously. She had written the first draft in a single evening, sitting at a kitchen table with a cup of tea, and the particular clarity of a person who has decided who they want to be and has arrived at last in the place where they can become it. The protocol was adopted across Alder's entire operation within 3 months. Nadine had reviewed it personally. She had sent Carmen one line in response. "This is exactly right." Carmen had printed that line and put it on the wall above her desk, not out of vanity, out of the particular need to have visible in the place where she worked evidence that the choice she had made at 12:18 a.m. on a rain-soaked tarmac had led somewhere worth arriving. 6 months later, Nadine stood at a podium in the neighborhood where she had grown up in Baltimore. A technology mentorship center which she had funded was opening. The room was full of young people, many of them the age she had been when a security guard stood between her and a room she had every right to enter. She spoke without notes. She said real power, not the kind borrowed from a title or a uniform or a set of assumptions about who belongs where. Real power is knowing exactly who you are even when everything around you is working to make you doubt it. It takes most of your life to learn that. It is worth every year of the learning. She paused. The quietest person in the room is very often the one paying the closest attention. The person paying the closest attention is very often the one who, when the moment arrives that requires something of them, knows exactly what to do. She looked at the room. People are going to look at you and decide things before you say a word, in under 3 seconds, based on what they see. That will not stop. The answer is not anger. Anger is a gift you give to people who do not deserve it. The answer is to build something they cannot take from you. To be so precisely, completely yourself that their assumption cannot find a foothold. And then, when you have built it, when you have the room and the platform and the position, do not be quiet about what you know. Make it legible. Make it cost something, not for revenge, for the people who come after you. She stepped back from the podium. The room came to its feet. Donna Park was waiting at the building's side exit with Nadine's coat and a coffee at exactly the right temperature. They walked out into the afternoon. Neither spoke for the first block. The car was waiting at the corner. Nadine got in. She looked out the window as the car moved through the neighborhood. She watched a woman in hospital scrubs waiting at a bus stop with her eyes closed and her chin slightly lifted, the posture of someone who has learned to rest in whatever increment of rest the day provides. Nadine watched her until the car turned the corner. She thought about what she owed, not in the accounting sense, not in the sense of debt, but in the deeper sense of what a person does with the thing that cost everything to build. She thought, do not waste it. Do not sit quietly in a power that cost you so much to build. Use it carefully, precisely, in service of the clearest possible truth, that every person who walks through a door deserves to be treated as a person fully and without condition before they have proven a single thing. That is not a radical idea. It is the oldest one there is. We simply keep forgetting it, and people keep paying the price of that forgetting. She looked out the window. She hoped this had been one of the times the world remembered. She believed, with the measured, earned optimism of someone who has watched things change slowly and understands that slow change is still change, that it was. If this story stayed with you, if Nadine's quiet strength, Carmen's courage at 12:18 in the morning, or Marcus's decision to speak up and keep speaking hit differently than you expected, I want to hear from you. Drop your city in the comments. Tell me if you've ever been in a room like that cabin, a place where someone looked at you and decided who you were before you said a single word. Tell me what you did, or what you wish you had done. This community is built on those stories, and I read every single one. If this video meant something to you, please hit the like button right now. It takes 1 second, and it helps this story reach the people who need to hear it most. Subscribe if you haven't already. Hit the bell so you never miss the next story, because we are just getting started. And share this one. Send it to someone who needs to be reminded today that real power is quiet, that dignity is not something you earn by proving your net worth, and that the person sitting still in the back of the room is very often the one who knows exactly what is coming. Thank you for watching. Thank you for being here. We'll see you in the next story.